Well, good evening. Nice to see you. I guess I'm the wrap-up speaker. Normally, people would explain after 2 days of talks that pretty well everything that needed to be said has been said already. The only reason I'm here is that I have not said it yet. But I come to this conference from something of a different perspective. I undoubtedly don't know a fraction of what you know about blockchain and probably cryptocurrency. But I do know the Congress, and I have a certain insight into human nature, having been involved in electoral politics for 35 years. I'll share with you some of the things that I do know, and then I'll open it up to questions. I expect that I'll take less time than Todd, because Todd's presentation was more organized, and thank you, Todd. I don't agree with everything you said, but I will explain why in a few minutes. First of all, it is clear that financial technology laws are out of date. They're going to have to be updated. They don't apply to the real world as we face it today. The Congress is going to be reluctant to update them, and when they are updated, I'm not sure they're going to be what you want. I think it was St. Francis of Assisi who one time suggested to his flock, don't pray too hard for fear one day all your prayers may be answered. The majority of the Congress doesn't understand blockchain, and they're somewhat frightened by cryptocurrency. And when you don't understand something, you generally fear it. And so your reaction is to protect yourself from it. And while Todd has been working with a number of thoughtful, and I call them open-minded if you want, young folks, I know you would readily agree, Todd, that it's not the young people that control the Congress. It's the older people. It's the seniors who have seniority. That's how they get to be chairpersons of the various committees, and they're the ones that are going to be calling the shots. And they're not the ones who sufficiently understand this industry. So that's one word of caution. Another word of caution is that the volatility of cryptocurrency is going to create headlines that people are going to remember. I'll bet of all the factoids that people know today, perhaps the one that's most vividly in their mind is that Odell Beckham, that we're all going to, or many of us are going to watch on Saturday, play for the Los Angeles Rams. He decided to put $750,000 of his professional football salary into cryptocurrency. And allegedly, earlier this week, it was worth $35,000. That's something people that, while they may not relate to, they're going to remember. Now, of course, when you look into how that $35,000 was calculated to have dropped from $750,000, a lot of that is actually taxation. But nevertheless, it's still a striking number. So those are a couple of cautions. And now let me get back to where I started in terms of financial technology laws. I do think that the blockchain concept and the fact that cryptocurrency is integrally related to it, but they are different things. I think it's here to stay. It will evolve, much like the internal combustion engine did. It was about 100 years ago when the Model T was introduced. And Henry Ford was savvy enough to have them built at a scale where most people, regardless of their education or their wealth, could afford to buy a Model T. That was his intent. 100 years later, Model T is a relic of the past, but the internal combustion engine is still with us. I think we're probably ready to evolve to a different level of electric vehicles. It'll last a whole century, and we built upon it. Blockchain may very well be that kind of integral element, like the internet. I remember at least 35 years ago, earlier or longer ago than many of you looking around the audience were even born, but I was mayor of Alexandria, Virginia, and I was a stockbroker, so I could provide for my family. And my best client was a man who called me one day and said, "Jim, I'm going to unload everything. I want to sell everything. I'm going to put it into one thing, and that one thing is something I'm starting with some other friends." And I said, "Well, tell me what it is, Jim." And he said, "Well, it's something, I can't really describe it, but people talk out in outer space, and they can have chats, and they're not connected to like telephone wires or anything. They just talk out in the ether, and they can communicate like that." I couldn't get my mind around it, and so I never invested, even though he offered the opportunity. The guy's name was Jim Kimsey. He was a founder of what became America Online, became a billionaire, and here I am today. And that was when $1 billion amounted to something. I don't want to make that same mistake again. So I want to learn more about blockchain, and I think my colleagues and people in the government should do as well, and I think they're doing so, both in the public and the private sector. In the private sector, Goldman Sachs did identify cryptocurrency and, in fact, the blockchain technology as FinTech 3.0, if you will. They're serious about it. They're going to put their money where their mouth is as well. And this public sector, the federal government, is going to come out with a memo shortly. It's governed by the National Security Council, and that's, I think, where it should be. It is a security issue, a national security issue. DOD is one of the people that is one of the agencies that's most concerned. And what they're going to do is to recommend several things. They'll give guidance. It won't necessarily be an action memo, but it will be guidance. They're going to prioritize that all of the government, every agency needs to coordinate on this. They need to have one policy. They can't be going off on their own. They're going to, I suspect, suggest guidance for the Federal Reserve. Even though they can't control, really, the Federal Reserve, they're going to suggest guidance. I think the Federal Reserve will come up with a cryptocurrency of its own. It won't be retail, but it will be one that the Federal Reserve banks use. They may try pilot or whatever, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. Some of these ideas, I want to give some credit to my colleague, Rick Levin, who runs our FinTech practice at Nelson Mullins law firm, because he deals with this on a daily basis. But it does appear that they're going to do that. I think that they're going to suggest that international transactions need to be synchronized. You're not going to be able, or they're going to urge that at least the allies that they can work with have the same kind of approach, that they collaborate together. Because there will always be people and organizations that are going to game the system. So they're going to try to get ahead of that, I suspect. And most of the enforcement is going to either be done by Treasury Department through taxation or the SEC through regulation. In terms of Treasury, your 1040 is going to require that you list any cryptocurrency that you owned over the past year. Right now, it's not legal tender, according to the definition, but it is property. And if it increases in value, then you're going to have to pay taxes on it. In terms of the SEC, Gary Gensler says, I've got enough legislation and regulatory authority to regulate this. He's taken about 100 actions already against crypto traders, what, 97 or something, I think it comes to as of today. I suspect he's going to get more aggressive. I think one of the reasons will be that he's going to get pressure from just the kinds of articles that Odell Beckham that I mentioned, you know, that the volatility in crypto markets is not healthy from a political standpoint. It's not healthy if you're holding a whole lot of it either. But most of the people that are holding cryptocurrency are sticking with it. They believe in it. I mean, that's fine. That adds stability to the market. When the market drops as fast as it did, invariably that draws people into a regulatory mode because people complain. They go to their member of Congress or their mayor, who, of course, isn't going to be able to do anything about it unless it's the mayor of a small town, perhaps in Tennessee, but they, who wants to turn one of his rooms into a crypto mine, which is probably not a terribly viable idea, but you know, good luck to him. But they are going to go to their federal legislators, and so it's not healthy from a political standpoint. So that's where we stand in regulation. I'm going to emphasize again, I do not think that you want to push hard for legislation, Todd. It's fine doing what you're doing. I also want to tell you, I'd love to see a third party. And there's a lot of people in both political parties who would love it. I mean, there's so many Republicans who would just as soon not be categorized as the party of Trump, but as the party of fiscal responsibility and you know, a strong military, and et cetera. And there's a lot of Democrats who would like to have a message that was more appealing to the suburbs where people have to pay their mortgages and want to live in a safe neighborhood, et cetera. The problem with the third party is that it's like driving a vehicle toward a destination without being able to use paved roadways. The two political parties have an infrastructure that raises money, that can activate activists, people that are willing to, you know, whenever they're told for whoever they're instructed to support, are going to knock on doors and you know, send mail and make the phone calls and so on. And that's part of the problem. That's why third parties are very difficult to get off the ground. But specific to the government and blockchain, I do think that at a time when trust in government is at historic lows, that having the ability to have an inalterable audit trail is an extraordinary advantage. It seems to me that some agencies are ready to fund some pilot projects for what would be called smart contracts. I think they're already in the works. If anybody knows about them, it's Gerard. But I think they're going to watch them and put some money in it and see whether it works. So, you know, I think all of you are on to something that matters. I want it to be successful. I think it's going to be, you know, a tricky tightrope to walk between those who want to regulate and suppress the energy, the excitement, the momentum that you have, and between those who, you know, are out to get a quick buck, who want to capitalize on something that is new and is not fully understood and not particularly regulated right now. I've encountered some people who really think that new legislation is almost going to expunge the record for people who haven't been complying with the laws such as they are. That's not going to happen. I think there's going to be a look back. I think that people are going to be held accountable, and I think some people are going to be made an example. I don't want it to be anybody in this room. That's, you know, I'll open it up for questions. I'm going to be just as candid as I possibly can. I don't know that I have, you know, anything else that's worth sharing with you. I'm just looking through some notes that I made, but basically, what you are involved in now, I think, ought to be allowed to evolve organically. You've got more of a free market than you're ever going to have. You're doing more experimentation than you'll ever be allowed to, frankly, within the confines of a government that's getting jittery about what's going on. I think to some extent there's almost too much proliferation of cryptocurrency. I mean, there's thousands now. You can't really keep track of them. Some of them are far better investment than others, obviously. But even though I've spent most of my adult life in the government and in the legislature, I would be very reluctant to cast your lot with a legislature, whether it be at the federal, state, or even local level. I really think the private sector at this point is evolving on its own, and I think it's pretty impressive what has happened in the last few years. So, but in terms of blockchain, the blockchain concept, I think that has a lot of merit, and I appreciate the fact that you've all attended this GBA event. I appreciate what you've done and the fact that you've been willing to sit here and listen. I don't know that you've learned anything from me, at least. I know you did from Todd. But at this point, if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to respond. I'm sure we're out of time, but have at it.
I want to say one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please stay up here. So, Jim was at our very first Future of Money Governance and Law at Georgetown University. It was a classroom. Mahela was there, and has been a great friend. And you said something at that event that stuck with my wife, and she's told me that many times. In fact, every time you come and spoken, your wisdom has been profound. But you did say if the government first is going to try to, I think you said, regulate it, then buy it, and then bury it.
Yeah.
But no, I think your reality, your wisdom is great. So if anybody has any questions, please introduce.
Thanks, Gerard. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. As we look at regulatory framework and the federal government's lack of ability to seem to come up with something that's reasonable or follows the laws of deductive reasoning. I know there are several states.
Did I
like-
say that they won't come up
No,
with anything that's
that
reasonable?
was-
Oh, okay.
that was my
kinda your
interpretation.
Interpretation.
That was my
Okay, yeah.
interpretation.
Okay.
You were much more eloquent. There are several states,
Cautious.
like the state of Utah, that have developed sandbox laws
Yes.
that allow a regulatory, almost like a period of, in Utah, it's 2 years, that a company can come into fruition and start to work
Yeah.
in a space without
Yeah,
regulatory.
yeah.
Can you give us your thoughts on these sandbox laws and how they can play a role in allowing innovation rather than having government stifling?
Yeah, I think Utah, I think Wyoming is doing something similar. I know those are fine. They are not intended to suppress or repress this economic activity. Their intent is to kind of legitimize it. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I'm just concerned, especially at the federal level. I don't worry necessarily about what Utah would be doing, but at the federal level, I'm just concerned that if you get into some kind of omnibus legislation that deals with financial technology laws, and it's going to be Christmas treed because it's going to be a compromise from every different ideological spectrum. I don't think it's going to look like what you want it to look. I'm not sure what it's going to look like. I don't think it's going to be have a decipherable image because it's going to be a conglomeration. That's all. That's just a concern. I'm sharing with it.
I thought of another question.
Yeah, okay.
I've got another question, if you don't mind. As we looked at the chart that Todd put up there about
Yeah.
all of the different agencies,
Yes.
and I have marriage licenses on the blockchain, so the idea of the Treasury Department regulating blockchain and regulating my marriage licenses doesn't really work. What is your idea of there being a commission, like a blockchain commission, that would consist of academia and developers that could be kind of a go-to for the federal government, whether it be legislative or executive bureaucrats, to try to help this space? Because I don't see anyone in government that understands this space. What would your thoughts of being like a nonpartisan academia and
Well-
business commission that could be the experts for the government?
I think that's fine. It's a good idea. You do have something of a working group that's been put together now. Designees from every major agency is working with the National Security Council. That's a good idea. Ultimately, I think that would be fine. I never used to think this way. For many, many years after I graduated from college and then graduate school, I used to think campuses were terrific places with great ideas. I'd be concerned about some professorial input that may not be necessarily grounded in the real world.
So maybe a business council, a commission consisting of industry professionals.
Business people, yeah. People that have to balance their books, yeah, that's a good idea. Even people that have to pay their mortgage, yeah. I mean, I've listened in on some of these conferences, and these brilliant professors will get up, but when you start listening to what they're saying, I think one of the foremost experts, according to him, or her, I guess, believes that the U.S. dollar is backed by U.S. assets, national parks and all that kind of stuff. It's backed. That's not so much true, It's not even backed by gold in Fort Knox. So. It's just, anyway, I won't go off on that. There's some wonderful people on our campuses. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your time and wise words. We appreciate you being here. My question kind of relates to a slide that Todd put up.
Yeah.
When it showed
It was an excellent slideshow. It really was.
It was. And the one slide compared to the amount of lobbying money that's going in from the Bitcoin side, the blockchain side versus the standard banking side. And of course, it's much lower on the blockchain side than the banking side. So my question
you noticed
is,
that.
yes, I did. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we all did.
Yeah.
But so my question is there any other political capital that we can use to be able, and I know you said, be careful what you ask for, you may get it, but is there any other political capital that we can use to try and have Congress see the importance and the urgency of this technology and make the wise decisions to pass laws that will be beneficial to the U.S. and the world?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a blockchain caucus. You know, they're young, energetic people, tend to be somewhat libertarian in their views, and you know, write them some PAC checks. Good.
So that's back to writing checks again.
What? I mean, right now, they're going to be drowned out by the banking lobby, but,
Yeah.
you know, encourage them. The best way to encourage somebody is to write them a check.
Okay, so political capital, more checks, got it.
Well, that's just trying to keep it grounded in reality, you know.
Gotcha, I appreciate it.
Okay. Yes? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, this is
Yeah.
not a question, so
Yeah.
forgive me. But I listened to the most recent hearings of the House Financial Services
Yes.
Committee, and pretty much all of the media basically said there's been a tremendous change in attitude. The antis have been more moderate, and the pros have been more intelligent.
Yeah, yeah.
So I talked to Dr. Stornetta, who invented the blockchain, and he told me that the reason for that is because Todd White has been working behind the scenes to educate the members of Congress, members of the House Financial Services Committee, and has been highly effective. So this is just, since Dr. Stornetta actually is the co-inventor of the blockchain and sits on his advisory board, he brings a lot of credibility to me and should bring credibility to everybody in this room. So this is just a tip of my hat to the man who actually is being extremely effective at bringing the Congress around to seeing this as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Now, this was a wonderful remark to make, particularly at the conclusion of this conference. I do know Scott. I recently had a long, long lunch with him on a Saturday over by the waterfront. I like him very much. I admire him. And if anybody is credible in this field, it's Scott. And when he acknowledges Todd, he means it, and it's well deserved. Thank you for making those comments. They're right on point, and I think we ought to give a hand to Todd for all that he's done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Gerard.
You bet. Thank you all. Good night.